creative friends. This episode is part 1 of how to make your own dog cross-stitch pattern. Before getting into a bigger, more complex project like this is going to be, thought it would be a good idea to start with a simpler project, especially for anyone who hasn't done any cross-stitch at all before. So let's get into the basics of reading a pattern and stitching. Remember, it's good to learn something new every day. In case it helps explain how following a chart, a cross-stitch pattern, results in a design, thought I would show the work in progress of this project, which is stitching paw prints and a heart in a row, and it's going to become a bookmark. But that's the basics of cross stitch, is reading a pattern and translating that pattern into stitches. A very common cross stitch fabric to do projects on is called Aida cloth. I assume Aida is the pronunciation, and it'll come in different counts. In this case, I'm doing 16 count, which means 16 stitches per inch. The fabric has a square weave, so the same number of rows up and down as sideways. Really doesn't matter which way you turn it, it's square, which is the reason that the chart, the pattern is done on square grid paper, is that the design transfers over. And so 16 count is 16 stitches per inch. And it also comes, I think, as low as 10 or 12 count, and then up to 18, 20 some count. And so about 14, 16 count is kind of in the middle. And you stitch with embroidery floss, and the strands are 6 ply. There are 6 threads in the strand as you pull it off the roll. And for the coarser fabrics, like 10, 12, 14 count, you would divide the strand in half so that you have three threads that you're working with. The 16 count, 16 and higher, you could take the strand and divide it up into working with 2 threads. And because the holes, the fabric, is finer, the holes are smaller, 2 strands would probably be enough coverage. I started out with 3 strands on this project, and it's working okay, but I probably could have used just 2. And to get that on the needle, rather than try and poke it through the eye, it's easier to lay it over the needle, pull it pretty tight, give it a good pinch, and then work the eye of the needle over the threads. So I've got my needle threaded, just a short little loose end there, maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches. And the Aida cloth has holes in the weave, small holes. The holes in the fabric are in pretty nice straight lines. So I think it'll be easier to show on the grid paper here if you just imagine that this is the cloth, and where the lines intersect is one of the holes in the fabric. This will be easier to see. So when you're starting to stitch a row in an area, what you do is bring the needle up, and you're going to make a half of a cross stitch, which is a diagonal. And then on the back side, if you're starting in a new area, just starting the pattern or starting in a new area, the loose tail can be anchored under the first 4 or 5 stitches. So by going back through the fabric and having that stitch on top of the loose tail, when you snug that down, that keeps it from pulling out as you start stitching. And like I said, probably want to do at least 4 or 5 stitches that way of going over on top of that loose thread, and that helps anchor it down. Well, it helps anchor it down if you get it to stay there. All right, there we go. And another stitch. So I'll make a row of 4 here. So we'll say on the pattern, like the start of the heart is 4 stitches. So I've got 4 half stitches, and then now I'm going to do the cross stitch. I'm gonna have to make a hole here. Again, the Aida cloth, the holes are built into the fabric. That is part of the fabric. Okay, so I've got 4 stitches there, and the tail is tacked down underneath those. And then now I am going to cross those stitches going back the other way. And obviously it's gappy because this is on this graph paper and not on the fabric, but gives you the visual, hopefully, of how that works when you're doing it on the actual Aida cloth fabric. And checking the back, again, that tail is tucked in. Also, periodically, you want to check the back for any snarls, which will happen. The thread will start to get twisted, and so you want to catch any snarls as soon as they happen. And one way to prevent that, if this shows here, is that just let your needle dangle and it'll untwist. So every, I don't know, 4 or 5, half a dozen stitches, you want to do that. Check that you're not getting a snarl in the back, and can do that, like I said, by dropping the needle. So in this case, like if I was following, if this here was this part of the pattern here, so for counted cross stitch, the reason it's called that is you would count. Okay, so this first row is 4 stitches, and then the next row you could count, you could either count out, okay, so it's 6 stitches, and also it is longer in each direction by 1 stitch. This next row, which will be, again, 6 stitches, or you could just look at it and see that it's in 1 stitch in either direction. It's 1 stitch longer. And so you continue stitching, doing the half stitches in the one direction. So hopefully that is making sense. And then another thing that I always try to do, besides keeping the back of the fabric, you know, neat without any snarls, and the first stitch, the diagonal is always, the diagonal of the first stitch is always in this direction. And the cross stitches finishing the X are on the other diagonal. So hope that makes sense, and you can see how you begin to follow the pattern. And so each square of the grid correlates to a stitch that you make on the fabric. So I hope that explained the basics of stitching. And if there's any questions, if something didn't make sense, please just put a question in the comments, and I'll try and explain better in the next video. And now I want to go over turning the paw print photo into a pattern. And by the way, that actually is a paw print of a dog I used to have. Her name was Tonka. And I'm glad I noticed one day she was leaving nice paw prints in the snow, and took a picture of it, because now I have this to use for different projects. It's just a nice little way to remember her. But I start with just tracing paper and tracing an outline of the pads, and then made photocopies of that in various sizes. By having this a little bit enlarged and this a little bit smaller, it just allows more detail, more stitches. And I got from there to here by taping this up on the window, putting grid paper over the top of it, and then traced the outline onto the grid paper with a colored pencil. The next part of making a pattern is deciding which squares are colored in and are part of the paw print, so they will represent a stitch. And around the edges, it's just a matter of deciding on each particular box if it is more in the paw print or outside of it. All right, I hope part 1 gave you enough information that you could actually start this project, either doing a bookmark or just anything decorative. And just in case anyone does want to do this project or one like it, let me see. I think you could hopefully do a screenshot and print them out, and then have a pattern to work from. So those are the paw prints, and then the heart pattern. A quick repeat of the supplies needed are the cross-stitch fabric or Aida cloth, embroidery floss, and for a project like this, you could pick whatever colors you think are pretty. Embroidery hoop, and embroidery needle, and that's pretty much it. Next episode, I'll do part 2 and show, by then I should have this finished, and we'll maybe show doing a kind of medium level pattern. So a little bit more detailed than this one, but not quite as complex as this one is going to be. Again, if there's any questions on part 1 about this dog paw print cross stitch project, please leave a comment, and would appreciate if you are learning something new, if you could give that like button a boop. Thanks very much. If you're enjoying this dog and animal art related content on the channel, if you could please subscribe. Thank you, and see you next video. Bye.